The purpose of today's lecture is to introduce you to a very important requirement for the labs, not only for the academic labs, but also for industrial labs as well. And this is what I'm calling, or we call, the Good Laboratory Practices, GLP. Chances are, if you end up going for an interview in an industrial lab, you will be asked a question, what is GLP? And so GLP stands for Good Laboratory Practices. Now, the emphasis, of my lecture today is the importance of the lab notebook as a major component of the Good Laboratory Practices. Let me explain the basis or where the Good Laboratory Practices started, or the origin of the Good Laboratory Practices, as well as its mission. So the GLP is Food Drug Administration, the US FDA regulation, and it embodies a set of principles that provides the organizational structure and process and framework by which all lab studies, should be planned, performed, monitored, and documented, as well as reported. And this is especially in adherence to what you call the standard operating procedures, the SOPs. So I'd like you to remember what the SOPs stand for, very, very common term in industry, the SOPs. Take note of this, the GLP is not necessarily related at all to the obvious laboratory safety practices, such as wearing, safety glasses, and the required PPE. But I emphasize the GLP is becoming a regulation that almost all industrial labs must abide by. So let me just explain a little bit about the history and the inception of good laboratory practices. It started around the 1970s. In the United States, Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, became aware of cases of poor laboratory practices all across the labs, in the US. And so the FDA decided to investigate up to 40 clinical studies that were being conducted by toxicology labs. And they discovered numerous fraudulent activities and poor laboratory practices. And as such, they recommended a set of guidelines by which all labs, especially those doing clinical studies, must abide by. And that happened in around 1978. Now, all non-US companies that wanted to do business, especially related, to clinical studies and drug formulation and marketing of those kinds of drugs, had to abide, by the US GLP regulations. Now, in 1981, because of that requirement that every company, whether abroad and they want to do business in the US, in 1981, the OECD produced the GLP principles that are now an international standard, by which most of the companies, have to abide by. And of course, there are many countries that are part of the OECD, so maybe you guys can take a look at which countries, are part of the OECD. So let me try to explain, sort of the basis of those fraudulent activities, that occasioned the necessity, of these guidelines, the GLP. Maybe the most infamous issue, was by this company, the Industrial Biotest Labs. And it was supposed to do some contract clinical studies for this very big company called Procter & Gamble, related to commercialization of their cosmetics products, particularly lotions and deodorants. Now, there was an active ingredient, in these cosmetics products, and this company, the biotest was supposed to confirm the toxicology aspects of that active ingredient and, indicate whether that compound, is safe for use in cosmetic formulations. Now, the problem is, that they went ahead and did the studies and they cleared, that active ingredient to be used in cosmetic products for this company, and the products went to the market. However, the active ingredient later on was actually found, to be a cancer-causing agent. And as the FDA was digging back to try and understand the authenticity of the clinical studies that were performed, they realized, that the biotest lab had not reported, some of the toxicology results, that had been found, during their study. So this company, had not documented, the fact that some of the mice had developed cancer, and they had taken those mice, and simply disposed them and not documented, that in their study. And so the FDA realized, that, this company had poorly trained study directors and study personnel. This company in that study, they had poorly designed protocols, and the protocols were not followed. And this is what we are calling the standard operating procedures, are not followed. And this was related to, when you make any analytical method, typically you have to document in a very detailed way, how that analytical method, is done. And that way it's easy, for anyone to actually reproduce based on the standard operating procedures or the protocols that you've documented. And so they realized this company had not done so. Also, the raw data was poorly collected and verified and was not traceable. They could not trace in the lab notebooks, where the data is. I suspect, some of it was not properly documented. There was lack of standardized procedures. And most importantly, the reports did not sufficiently, verify, the type of data that had been obtained. And some of the raw data was also falsified, it was inaccurate, particularly the fact that, there were animals, that had actually succumbed to cancer, and that one was not actually documented. And so you're going to see that this one was very, very infamous. In actual fact, some of the study directors, had to go to jail, because of that very infamous incident of falsifying laboratory results. And for that reason, the FDA came up with what you call the GLP regulations. So the purpose and the major objective of the GLP is the following. The data that is submitted must be a true reflection of the results, that are obtained in the study. Very important, the data, must be traceable. So whoever is trying to audit should be able to look at the data in the lab notebook and actually trace who did it, when it was done, under which analytical methods were used, what were the standard operating procedures of that analytical method, and so on. And so the data has to be traceable. Now, the GLP also promotes international acceptance of tests, and that's why any company across the world now, has to actually follow, the GLP. That way, the data has international acceptance. And of course, in this day and age of globalization, where the products we use here, are produced in many different types of countries, international acceptance and verification, of data and quality of products, is particularly important. The GLP, also promotes quality and validity of data that is generated in the testing, of chemicals. Now, it also seeks to protect, the human health and the environment as well as the animal welfare. And so the critical thing, that you're going to find is that for the GLP, maybe the major critical part is documentation. The data must be a true reflection, it must be documented very, very accurately in the lab notebook. And that's my emphasis, the importance of the lab notebook as part of, or as a core part, of the GLP. Take note of this, the scope of the GLP, involves companies that are working on pharmaceutical products, cosmetics, pesticides, food and feed additives, and so on, industrial chemicals and so on. That's why I said, chances are if you end up working in a company, you would be forced to abide by, the GLP, the good laboratory practices. The key thing, lab notebook, clear documentation of your data. So the requirement of the lab notebook, very, very important, in this course, and very, very important, in the industry. The lab notebook in this course will be permanently bound on lab notebook, the physics lab notebook. Now, the laboratory data, that you generate must be recorded directly in the lab notebook. So this means, you don't first, record on a piece of paper and then transfer it into the lab notebook, because mistakes, could happen when you're doing that transferring. Instead, the data should be directly recorded in your lab notebook. So no loose leaf pads and so forth. The data must be directly recorded in the lab notebook. Take note of this, the first 2 or 3 pages, should be the table of contents. So leave that blank. The first 4 or 5 pages, leave that blank, for the table of content. Now the data must be recorded, legibly, and you cannot erase it, using corrective tape, or fluid and so on. So I should be able to see if a mistake was done, how, what was the initial data that was recorded. So what you need to do is just cross it, with just one line to indicate that a mistake, had been made when you are doing the initial recording. But I should be able to see the original data. So the lab notebook will be a complete record of all the laboratory activities. And so it will be very important, to record the data, and all the relevant, calculations should be in the lab notebook. So typically you would have the left side, of your book should be for your calculations, and the right hand side, should be where you actually record, your data. So any calculations, like I said, should be on the left side, of the lab notebook. If at all there are outputs from the instrument, such as chromatograms or spectra, they should be permanently and neatly glued onto your lab notebook. If at all there are calibration graphs, from Excel, they should be permanently glued, onto your lab notebook. If you've generated a lot of chromatograms, you do not have to glue all of them. So just choose a representative chromatogram, and just, paste that on. So you don't have to replicate, chromatograms or instrument output into the lab notebook. Otherwise it will be very difficult to navigate through it. So take note of this, when you're in the lab, you'll be given a sample specimen, and that sample specimen has got a sample code. That sample code, should be very clearly recorded in your lab notebook. There will be no way to grade your work without the sample code. Lastly, Remember, parts of the lab notebook will be included in the lab reports, for grading. So I'll be grading your lab notebook as we go along. Let me give you an example, of a sample lab notebook, that is fairly well done in terms of good recording. So it should look like this. You've got the physics lab notebook. It should look like that. Your name, the course and so on, that is on the hard cover. The first few pages, should be the table of contents, and every page, should be numbered. Every page should be numbered. So as I said, the data should be recorded on the right-hand side. And in this case, actually, the student forgot to put in the date. So the date should be there, the title of the work that you are doing, pipette calibration in this case. And the data, should be recorded there. The calculations, on the other hand, should be recorded on the left-hand side of the lab notebook. So similar to this again, I think this one was spectrophotometric determination of trace ion, which will be your first lab in the 3rd week. So again, you can see the date should be there, and the sample code, should be very clearly taped in there or glued in there or written, in a very legible way. The data that was initially corrected or rather collected in the lab, should be indicated there. You've got, the calculations, and you've got the output, in this case, the Excel calibration graph, that is glued, onto the lab notebook. So again, you can see the completeness, of how you should record data and calculations and results in your lab notebook. So just to remind you again, the first 2 weeks of the labs will be the preliminary lab exercises, just to make sure that you can do, volumetric and gravimetric tests appropriately, and to make sure that you've got the right skill in terms of doing the classical methods of sample preparation. So you're going to do the analytical balance exercise. You're going to calibrate, the glassware. And you're going to do things like standard solution preparation. You're going to practice how to take an aliquot using a pipette. And you're going to do a lab exam as well related to demonstrating those skills. That's going to be next week on Tuesday. And you're going to submit a lab report, based on the exercises that you're going to do in the next 2 weeks. I've already posted for you the lab schedule on Blackboard. Now it's important, to remember the lab report will be due on these dates, and there will be no excuse, for late submissions. So make sure we have the first lab report submitted on Blackboard by the September the 22nd, and so on, a minimum of 3 lab reports by November the 13th, and so forth. This one is a repeat, make sure before tomorrow's lab you've gone through those video links and looked at what's the best practice in terms of each of these exercises that you'll be doing in the lab. So make sure you view those videos before you come to the lab, because you won't have a lot of time, to do your exercises, so you need to be well prepared. So go through those video links again. So thanks again. We're gonna see you tomorrow in the lab. Thank you.